Gory Toons presents. Dieseling Derby. Okay, we've made to the longest, most ambitious, and probably the best episode. Oh boy, this is a long one. It's 9 minutes, which I don't even think I've reached that duration before. Anyway, this is based on Creature from the Krusty Krab, my favorite SpongeBob video game. Yeah, I'll say it up front. CFTKK Solo's Battle for Bikini Bottom TBH. That's kind of bold, but to me, Battle for Bikini Bottom is in the same boat as pre-movie SpongeBob, where it's put on a high pedestal, whereas CFTKK isn't so lucky. CFTKK just has an identity, charm, and is memorable. Plus, it's short and simple. I don't get people who say it drags on. But I'm getting sidetracked. Let's focus on the episode at hand. As you see here, there's a lot of characters in this episode. I wanted this episode to be special, so I tried to put in as much characters I felt could be put in. As for the racing storyline, again, that's inspired by CFTKK, but also I really like those wacky racing plot lines. I might have beaten HDF to the punch on this one, since they've never made a race car episode. I mean, there was that one season 1 episode, but I'm talking something longer and having a bigger focus on the actual race. Also, this episode feels like a much better version of All for Ski. That episode itself was already my longest and most popular at the time, so I took cues from that and polished it. It's about SpongeBob. Pop has his own little B-plot, there's references scattered, SpongeBob is constantly on the move, and it's a lot more fast-paced. All for Ski is obviously a precursor to this, and I'm glad I tried making another big episode like that. It also helps that this episode was pretty much the last Gory Toons episode for a long while. It felt so good to make, since at that time, I didn't have much interest to make more Gory Toons episodes anymore, and took a long break. There's one more episode after this that was in 2023, which was several months later in October, and that also felt like a good send-off. Anyway, back to the animation. I believe this is when the characters' actual personalities truly shined. I was a bit disappointed that a lot of these characters don't show their actual personality, and most of the time, they just perish or make others perish. This episode was my attempt to finally do something with the source material I actually had. That's also why this episode probably had slightly less focus on the gore, or even the Happy Tree Friends aspect of Gory Toons. This episode is more about wacky races and stuff, with the deaths being a bit of a side thing. And it finally allowed the main characters to properly show their personalities. Here, you have the Cartman and Kenny duo. I love this duo so much, and I wanted to pair them together in an episode for a long while. As I just said a minute ago, I wanted to do more with the characters' actual personalities in this episode, and having Kenny and Cartman teaming up to win a race was one of my ideas I really wanted to do. Now they're in rock bottom. The cliff ahead of the road is another CFTKK reference. Also here, you see Uncle Jimbo fixing up Cartman and Kenny's car. It was a little nod to how Jimbo has a close relationship with Cartman and Kenny. I felt he really suited this role as their repairman. And yeah, King DDD is back to being an antagonist. Again, I feel he would provide more entertainment in Gory Toons if he was more antagonistic. I also had him team up with Plankton, which fits. Besides, DDD was always competitive and most usually has a rival role even in some of the newer games, so it doesn't feel all that alienated from his character. Aside from that, as you see here, Sniffles has his little metal detector from wrong side of the tracks. A lot of my viewers are a huge fan of Sniffles, and I entirely don't blame them. In fact, when I first got into HDF, he was my favorite character. Now we're on to Pop and Steven. Yeah, Pop is back in full force, and he's now smoking a cigar and wearing a coconut helmet from Happy Trails. Pop in Gory Toons is this cartoon's dumb character, so that's probably why I decided to go so over the top with his race car fit. And here comes the bomb. Boom. Surprised they survived that honestly. And you see here, Pop is choking on his cigar. Okay, I think it's very obvious that Plankton here is clearly Gory Toons' escargot, which is ironic, since you literally saw him a few seconds ago. That aside, DDD definitely acts like his anime portrayal, although I kept his video game design. I guess I could have changed his model to reflect that, at least in this episode. Here's the Alaskan bullworm. Again, CFTKK. By this point, the race becomes a lot more intense. Imagine driving inside of a creature's stomach. That would be horrifying. I still can't believe this is 9 minutes long. I really put a lot of effort into this episode. This, and the one afterward, is definitely where I peaked. And I believe this one death is a good example of it. I'll let it play out. We're back to SpongeBob and Patrick. Actually, about Patrick, this is the first time he's been in a regular episode. I guess he wasn't in Gory Toons, because it would be redundant to have another dumb character when Lumpy already exists. Here, I really played out SpongeBob's brave side of his personality. That's my favorite attribute about him, besides those episodes where he snaps. He looks, acts, and is a wimp, but he can be brave and resilient when he needs to. It helps that SpongeBob is effectively this show's version of Lumpy, so he gets quite a few moments like this. I mean, in the Among Us parody, he stabs the imposter. Everyone's pretty much on edge after what just happened. A lot of fun expressions here. We also get Kenny swearing at Cartman, lol. Here's SpongeBob and Patrick jumping over a clam, which flies into Kenny. Mandatory Kenny demise. By this point, Kenny has finally kicked the can. It's a bit ironic that he wasn't the first to go. In fact, he's one of the last few people who perish. But that's probably a good thing since this episode gives him more to do. So we're finally at our last few racers. They're all neck and neck. And there goes Cartman. And there goes Pop and Steven. Now it's SpongeBob versus Plankton. You see here, they're finally close to the finish line. And now it gets intense. Like really intense. I also think this episode is a bit touching in hindsight for a long while. I'll talk about that later. Almost there. Almost. They're about to reach the finish line. They can feel the wind on their pores. They're an unbeatable team, baby. Boom. DDD and Plankton. Reduced to ash. And the race has concluded. SpongeBob SquarePants and Patrick Star win. Now here's the touching part. SpongeBob lives. They win the race. And this is the final episode for a long time. The end of an era. Thank you. See you in Season 3's final episode.